seeing the number of solo businesses with 7 figures. Folks think they need to build the next Google or Microsoft. Like, if I leave corporate, I've got to start a company. I'm like, not anymore.
Well, hey, friends. This is Your Work Friends. We're two HR leaders who have no filter, and we're here to expose all of the stuff that you need to know about work. I'm Mel,
I'm Francesca.
and with us today is Brett Trainor, who is the founder of the Corporate Escapee. You can find him on LinkedIn. He has an awesome podcast. He also just launched a Slack community that's pretty rad. I just joined that community myself. And he's from a fun town called Wheaton, who has a annual fair called the Cream of Wheaton, which just made my day last week when I heard this news. So Brett, welcome to the pod.
No, it's great to be here. I'm thrilled that you asked me to come on and looking forward to the discussion. And yes, the Cream of Wheaton. Never thought of it as a big event here, but it is kind of clever.
And they don't serve cream of wheat at Cream of Wheaton, which I feel like is a miss.
That's
It's a sponsor miss for sure, right? I mean, they're
Yeah.
using the name for it.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
The
I love
cocoa
it.
wheat's still out there. If you grew up in the Chicagoland area, there used to be the show called The Bozo Show, and it was
Oh,
sponsored
yeah.
by Cocoa Wheats. You remember Bozo?
I remember cocoa wheats. Yeah.
Cocoa
We
Wheats.
went down memory lane not too long ago with some of those cereals that are no longer available, but they should bring them back. I know some people are bringing back those retro brands, you know, that
Yeah.
they kind of went out of business or bankrupt, but the name still means a lot. So I think we're starting to see more of that.
I just bought Captain Crunch berries a couple of weeks ago for the first time in 15 years. Scraped the hell out of the top of my mouth, but it was delicious. It was delicious and worth it.
I'm more of a peanut butter crunch, but I do like the crunch
Mhm.
berries.
Yeah.
Remember the old
right?
like Count Chocula and Frankenberry?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Heck yeah.
And Blueberry. Yeah.
Was Blueberry a seasonal or was that a ongoing?
I
It
think
may have been.
seasonal, right? Blueberry with the ghosts.
Yeah, it was so
Right.
good.
So
So
good.
funny. How
Pulling it on
I-
top of that. How do
I
we get
know.
this?
yeah.
Well, Brett, the Corporate Escapee, I love your mission, which is to help 10,000 corporate Xers escape the 9 to 5. Tell us more about it. What's the Corporate Escapee?
Yeah, it was funny because I got to that point about 4.5 years ago after a 30-year career, mostly corporate, a couple of stints out to the entrepreneurial world and back into corporate. Ended it with a 1.5 year run in management consulting because that's what you should do at the end of a corporate career is go into traditional management consulting. But just realized that I was just done, right? It wasn't, I'm like, where is this going? What am I going to be doing, right? We don't have pensions. I shouldn't say we, the collective. A lot of us didn't. Right, corporate didn't offer pensions. So am I just going to be fighting this treadmill for the next 10 to 15 years, or is there something better? And like I said, 4.5 years ago, didn't have a plan. Hindsight, I highly encourage folks, if you're leaving, have a plan. Don't have to, but it makes the transition easier. And then the last year, really, I'm like, there's got to be more of me out there, right? Because for the first 2 years, 95% of what I was doing was the fractional work, did some consulting in the B2B space. I was by myself, really didn't tell anybody that I was doing it. And then slowly gained momentum, caught up with some different folks. And I'm like, yeah, the Corporate Escapee, it's more than just work, it's the lifestyle. And then I just started playing with it. I decided just to have some fun to get on TikTok and test because I'm like short attention span, 60 seconds, 90 seconds. And all of a sudden that took off. No idea why, but what it reaffirmed was that there is a lot of people. I think I've got like 20,000 followers on TikTok, and to a person that I talked to, it's like, yeah, I didn't know I was stuck. I didn't know there was other folks, but man, it really resonates with me. So I decided to make that my personal mission to say, if anybody's out there that wants to get out, there is opportunity, there's a path forward, there's tools, etc. So even though it's been around for probably about a year, I would say in the last 2 to 3 months, it's really found its footing.
I will admit I found you on TikTok. I am a recent corporate escapee, and I immediately was like, yes, let's connect on LinkedIn, join your Slack community, because I think what's really appealing for me to what you're doing is the community that you're building around it. As someone who's new to trying it out, I think that community is so important just to help you succeed, right? And lessons learned, sharing. So I really love what you're building over there. Who is this for? Who is this not for?
Yeah, good question. I tell everybody that if you got 20 to 30 years of experience and if somebody's paying you to do a job, you can do it, right? The can and should are two different things. I think who it's not for is if you're really risk adverse. We're not talking super risky ventures. You're not putting your family savings into a new business or something like that. But what corporate does give you, assuming you don't get laid off, is a steady paycheck and they pay some form of your benefits. And so there's a
Mhm.
floor in corporate that you always know you're going to have that paycheck. But with freelance fractional, what I call the corporate escapee, the ceiling is much higher, the flexibility is much higher, but there could be lows, right? You could have a 0 month where you're not bringing any revenue in, and you have to be comfortable with that and knowing that it's not going to stay that way. But it's not for everybody. The other thing that I've found is important is you have to be accountable to yourself. I really took that for granted as I transitioned from corporate into the solo space. Was I own the priorities, I own my schedule. And for the longest time, I found myself just cramming more work into the day, but I really wasn't getting stuff done until I flipped and schedulized and put some structure into my day. But yeah, if you're not accountable to yourself and you like somebody else's direction, then this may not be for you. Everybody else, I think you want more flexibility, freedom, control, opportunity, then absolutely you can. I've had probably 120 conversations with TikTokers, Gen Xers that have came in, and more for my learning to say, what else can I do or what can we do to support? But what I was finding is the nichiest of niches in corporate, there's still businesses that are looking for that help. And I call them the SME, small and mid-sized businesses, startups, nonprofits are looking for that type of help. So if you got experience and somebody's paying you to do a job, there's an opportunity to do it.
What do you think is for folks who are successful when they do this? Do they have a specific mindset, skill set that stands out to you?
I think open mind, right? Because one thing in
Mm.
corporate, it just teaches you to go follow the rules, right? Don't rock the boat. Incremental improvements are good. And you just have to have more of an open mind. We use the cliche of Gen X, but it's released back into the wild, right? We grew up without the rules and the restrictions, and then 20 to 30 years in the box of corporate. You have to go back and be okay with experimenting and asking. We talk about can and should, and it's will. A lot of people, I can do that. I can go. So I do have that experience. I can, right, run this project. I can work for the, but will you do it? It's the
Mm.
people that actually
Um,
take action are the ones that are successful. And I know I mostly work with Gen X, but I've had some 20 somethings that are super curious about how do I do this? I said, well, look, if you get your job, you do this, what is the problem that you're solving for this company? There's probably a bunch of smaller companies that have this problem. You can just restructure it. 20 minutes later, he's like, okay, I got this. Thanks. See ya. And so he was going to go take action.
okay.
Where I think if we've been around longer, we like to over engineer it. We like to overthink it. And we're trying to look for the perfect plan. I'm guilty. One of my colleagues in management consulting used to tell me, Brett, done is better than perfect. That was a harder thing for me to transition from. Just go do it. And it's okay. If this little experiment doesn't work, you try something else and it's going to be okay. Because at the end of the day, if it doesn't work, you can go back and find your corporate job, right? If it's not
Mhm.
for you, but
Right.
but I encourage anybody that's thinking about it, just give it 100% and see if it doesn't work. Don't half-ass it, and then if it doesn't work, oh, that wasn't for me. But if you're gonna do
Yeah.
that, then maybe it's not for you anyway.
Right. If this is your new business, you treat it like a business. You can't,
Yeah.
otherwise it's a hobby. It's just a
Yeah.
hobby.
There's something so freeing about going back to thinking about your feralness as a kid, right? Or thinking about the world of opportunity that you get as a child. I remember being in college and thinking, wow, anything's possible. Anything could happen. And I think you get that when you're creating your own space. I'm wondering if you're seeing that in the landscape now. What is the market for folks that want to do freelance, fractional? Do you see it's picking up? It's growing? It's depleted? What do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely think it's picking up because that's one of the concerns I hear from folks is it's saturated. I'm like, we're the farthest thing from saturated. When you think about the number of small businesses that are out there and
Yeah.
the help that they need, I think we're in the early stages of this. And what kind of opened my eyes is I was on a podcast called The Human Cloud,
Mhm.
and John and Matthew do a lot of work in freelancing at the enterprise, right? I have more focus on the small business, and part of our conversation was me flipping at him and asking, well, why are you seeing this rise in freelance? And what he told me was, Brett, we haven't seen, even 3 years ago, there wasn't somebody with your experience or expertise that was open to fractional work for small businesses. So
Mhm.
small businesses have never had access. You two are a perfect example of that as well. If a small business was looking to hire you, they couldn't afford you. And so what do? They have to hire somebody junior just to take a chance on somebody new or promote somebody from within. Not all bad choices, but if you really need help and your org's growing, this is a perfect solution. It's the rare perfect or win-win, right? Especially with fractional. There's other ways you can slice it, but fractional is the easiest transition, I think. And so what fractional is basically it's a day per week per client.
Mhm.
And most of the time it's focused on strategy work, not a lot of the tactical and the doing stuff because it would be hard to do that one day a week. But what you will be able to do is save that business a third of the cost, right? If they're going to hire a full-time equivalent for that HR lead, they couldn't afford it. But with you, for a third of the cost, they can. Now they can start to build a team with a couple of other fractionals that gives them expertise that they couldn't have otherwise had. And the other last piece that I encourage people to think about the business owner is it minimizes risk. Because
Yeah.
if you make a hire, it's an 18-month mistake if you get it wrong. And if you're hiring a type of role you've never hired before, that's hard. And if you can
Yeah.
bring somebody in that's fractional, maybe it's a 3 months to start, but then it's month to month. And a lot of what the fractionals will do is work with that business to transition out. If they're ready for a full-time, they can help you find that full-time person. So I think where the industry or where the overall market's got to catch up is fractional still a relatively new term, but when you
Yeah.
explain it to the business owner, they're like, yeah, I get it. And we're starting now to actually see, hey, we are actually looking for a fractional CFO for this role. So you won't find it in LinkedIn job postings yet, but it's not like this is just one-sided where it benefits the escapees because you can charge a premium for what they do. It gives them more flexibility, but the businesses are actually going to benefit from this as well.
Yeah. You see a lot of movement in organizations trying to outsource orgs or work that is not core to their competence because they don't want to be in that business. And this is one of the ways I think that they could do that either through fractional or contract, full outsource. It does seem like we're at this wave of this coming, right? Businesses understanding the benefit of not holding on to full-time labor because that's so expensive. It's expensive for turnover too if they don't work out. And also people wanting a different lifestyle, work to mean different things and to still get paid and paid well. Do you feel like in 5 years this is going to just get bigger, or do you feel like it's going to go the other way? My gut is it's
No,
going to get nuts.
Yeah.
it's going to get nuts. I think
Yeah.
every last dollar I had, it's going in this direction just because a couple of reasons. One, think about it from when you were in corporate, what percentage of your week was actually spent on the job that they brought you in to do, right? 30%,
Truly.
40%, maybe at a
Yeah.
high end. So you're paying 60% of overhead from the business perspective, and that's where fractional is. They're super intentional about using you only for what you're good at because they don't want you in unnecessary meetings. It just
Yeah.
doesn't make sense. So I think just economically it's going to make sense, and that's why I think that the small and mid-size can really take advantage of this because the bigger orgs, right, they're still trying to figure out sales and marketing alignment. How do we go digital? Things they probably should have figured out 15 years ago, they're still struggling with. So how do they incorporate a more flexible workforce is going to be hard. I think certain organizations or operating units within bigger companies are starting to figure out how to do it. But for the most part, it's not there. I've used a couple of analogies that help people see it. The one is think about it as if you're making a major movie, right? Hopefully it's a blockbuster, but you got hair, you got makeup, you got actors, you got film, you got all these different, mostly small entities that come together for 12 to 18 months, build this thing, they go away, and this group may work with each other here, and they may work over there. And then the other one that's similar to that, if you remember the movies Ocean's 11, when George Clooney wanted to rob the
Yeah.
casino, what did he
Yeah.
do? He needed a disguise artist. He needed a bomb guy. He needed X, Y, and Z, all specialists that come together, get
Mhm.
paid for what they do, drive towards an outcome, and then go back to their separate ways. I just think the Industrial Revolution pushed us into offices. There was value in having people side by side because everybody was doing the same job. You can learn. Now all that side by side stuff is going to be automated. And what
Yeah.
are you actually learning? Would it answer, Francesca, to your question? I think it's fundamentally going to change it. And it just depends on how quick. I think we're in the early stages, so it's going to be fascinating to see where this goes.
I also think for employees, I've been hearing from a lot of people that they feel they're stuck in organizations, they're at a manager plus level, and they're like, I thought I was being brought in for my expertise, but I'm not being listened to sometimes. And or to your very good point, the majority of their day is spent on shit that is absolutely not even relevant to their job. And there's something so beautiful about having an agreement that you're being brought in for your skill set, you're being paid for your skill set, and all the other minutia goes away. So from a business, this makes sense. From an employee or from someone this is their craft, this can be a really beautiful way to work too, because you're actually getting paid for your expertise.
Yeah. And
I
you can
mean,
do it where you want, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
that's why I'm watching
Bermuda.
these return to office mandates. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. You've been in the workforce for 30 years, and this is the way. I love your viewpoint on this,
We just talked
right?
about it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, feelings. We agree with you wholeheartedly. You hire adults, these are experts you're hiring to come into your organization, but you don't trust them to get the job done. And that's a larger issue we think is happening.
If you don't trust them, they're not going to work any harder in the office, and
Right.
you can argue they're more inefficient at the office. And I grew up in it, so I saw the value at times when having colleagues and working. I just think that those days are
They're
gone,
gone.
right?
They're
Yeah.
Everything
gone. It's interesting because there's these decision makers that are making really regressive decisions. Like, we're just going to keep going back. We're going to keep going back. And it's like that ship has sailed. And I think the people that are willing to think about a new way will win.
for as long as we're on this, culture is something I've been thinking about from a pure execution standpoint from a company. And I think culture matters for the ownership group, right? This is what the vision, this is the thing we want to create. Man, once you get below a certain level, everybody's just doing it for the paycheck. And you can tell me there's
Mm.
companies that believe in the mission, which I'm 100% sure there are, but I'm saying 80% of the companies, 80% of the workers, and they just want to be paid fairly, treated with some flexibility, right? And then they'll do a good job. I don't want to say culture is overrated because it's not, but don't think the 10,000 employees are all going to buy into your culture. You're never going to get that, especially with return to office man and all that other stuff. But if you plug in specialists for a lot of these key roles that just love to do this job, they like you and the company, you're going to get a lot further than trying to force people into a box again.
My whole thing on companies right now is they are, not everybody, but most of them are misrepresenting themselves in terms of what they're offering from an employee experience perspective. Because a lot of organizations we're a great place to work. We're a great place to work for mothers. We're a great diversity, equity, inclusion, blah, 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 blah. We have all of these benefits. We care about mental health. We care about all this stuff. And the actual working experience day to day doesn't match the brand that they've been sold. And so there's this sense of betrayal. There's this sense of like, what the fuck? Excuse my French.
Yeah, no, I
I'll cut
get
that
it.
out.
Yeah.
To me, one of the best relationships you can get into in anything, romantic, friend, parent, job, is when it's honest. And
Yeah.
contracts are honest.
Yeah.
Contracts are honest. You know what you're going to get. Oh, I love your point of view on this. I think a lot of employees feel like I thought I was signing up for something completely different than what I've been given.
Yeah, the one-way street.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're hearing that from a lot of folks who independently reach out to us to share. And I agree with you wholeheartedly, Francesca, because culture is the responsibility of the organization, team, and individual. But it takes all three of those elements for it to be effective throughout. But if at each of those levels you don't have everyone bought into your good point, Brett, there comes a point sometimes when an organization potentially is just too large where they're not going to be able to manage all of the micro cultures that have now
Yeah.
popped up. It's like having a core set of values and making sure that everyone operates within that core set of values, and how they work is so critically important. But if they're not really paying attention to that, or have expectations around that, or build performance management around those expectations, and they're really measuring it, then the culture and the microcultures get out of control. And to Francesca's point, yeah, there's a sense of betrayal from people who were sold, hey, this was a great working environment from others, but I joined this team and my direct leader won't let me leave early to go watch my kid's soccer game. Then that's
Yeah,
not a great organization for that mom, but maybe a mom on another team is getting the opportunity to do
that's a
that. But it
great
all
experience.
depends on your direct team.
Yeah,
So,
what's interesting when I was starting to have these conversations is the relationship between as a corporate escapee or an employee. Employee is definitely it's mostly command and control. Some companies do
Mhm.
give you some flexibility, but I heard that command and control. I talked to a executive recruiter friend of mine who told me that there was a CEO, they were hiring a chief people officer, and the board was basically dictating who he was going to hire. I'm like, so
Mhm.
he's being micromanaged at the highest level. And this wasn't a family owned company. This was a pretty good sized business. And when I started to think through this, this is why I think fractional can start to even that playing field. So the way I think the old days, a freelancer is really transactional. Hey, we're hiring you to do this job. We'll pay you this. We both agree. Done, done. Where fractional is more of a partnership, right? I'm part of that organization just on a part-time basis. I've got to be on the same page as the owner, the C-level that's bringing me into that organization. We decide together what's going to work, right? You can't tell me what to do all the time because one, that's not why you brought me in, but two, that's not the way our relationship is. So you get like commanding control as an employee, partner is a fractional, transactional is freelance, and there's some service businesses in there that are definitely more transactional, but at least
Mhm.
give the employee a leg up. The other thing I encourage folks to think about, even if you're staying in corporate, think of it as you are still the CEO of your own company of one, and your product is your expertise, and what this company is paying you to do that job is salary, benefits, and the requirement of you being on site 3 days, 5 days, one day, just everything that's involved. And would
Yeah.
you run your business that way if this is the way the customer? Maybe you would, and you're willing to trade off because this is what you need. But for me, I just all right, this is what you're paying me. This is what I get, right? This is the vacation and all those things, and just accepted it versus thinking if I treated this as this was my company and this is my skill, I probably would have done things differently. Maybe not have had as many options, but too often I think we're just way too reactive and not as intentional with it.
I think a lot of people think that that's the only way. I grew up thinking you're going to go to college, you're going to go to grad school, you're going to get a job at Accenture, and you're going to keep on and this is the way. This
yeah.
is the path.
Yeah.
And it's
It's
not
the
the only
safe thing.
one.
It's the right thing, right? My plan was 'cause I was the first one in my family that actually went to college. So business, I
Me
had no
too.
idea what that was. And so my goal before I started was game warden in Wisconsin. That sounds awesome, right? I had no idea. Then 30 years later, I'm like, what the hell happened? You get
You can still
sucked
do
in with
that, Brett. You can still
Yes,
do
yeah,
that.
do it.
I'm not that far away. Trust me. You get into that. Somebody called it a treadmill, and I think it's the perfect thing. Somebody said that salary is the drug that keeps you going. It's that next level. If I just get promoted to that next position, then I'll end up with enough money to do this, but it's never really enough. And what's happened this last year is the fear factor again, saying, well,
Mhm.
we
Yeah.
lay you off. What are you going to do? There's nothing out there. And they scare you into staying into a job longer than maybe that you would want to. And times are changing, which is so exciting. There's enough signs that we're moving in the right direction.
I think so. I think the sign of how many folks and younger folks who are looking at exploring this space too, not just going into corporate, there's a real desire, I think, for people to own their time and how
Mhm.
they
Yeah.
spend it and who they spend it with. And I think that's so beautiful about this type of work too, because you have a bit more autonomy around what you're working on, who you're working with. When after COVID, I will say my personal experience was really reflecting on how do I want to spend my time.
Right.
And I tell Francesca this all the time. I want to work where there's a three-legged stool of respect, relationships, and meaningful work. So in everything I do, that's what I want to do. And that's appealing to me about your messaging and going out on your own. And it seems possible.
It's true. An author, Steve Glavesky, Australian guy, wrote Time Rich. And he's like, look, you can always earn more money, but you can never earn time back. I'm like,
Mm-mm.
so
Yeah.
true. And you think about our corporate careers, we built our lives around those jobs, whatever it was, right? Vacations, school, workouts. You had to get up at 6 a.m. if you wanted to go to the gym. A little more flexibility now, but not completely. So our lives
Mhm.
really
Yeah.
revolved around whatever corporate job that we were doing, and not the other way around, which again, we're going to look back in 50 years and go, what the heck were we thinking? I
Yeah.
Yeah,
mean,
right.
Can we talk about the money for a second? Because I think this might be one of the things that people get nervous about when they think about this. Do you find in general that the money is like net, it's better, it's worse?
I think it's
Talk about the
better, but
money.
you've got the risk, because when I left, it was all about the money.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, hell
Right.
yeah.
What had happened to me was, as a management consulting firm, I saw what they were billing me out as, and I saw what I was taking home about that billable rate. I'm like, this is crazy. What it did teach me is what my market rate was. And that's one thing I think we all do, is undervalue what we have and what we do. Where it's definitely going, and I can speak from the fractional and from the service side, because when I say fractional, it's again that on average, it's a day per week, probably no more than 10 hours a week, no more than 2 hours per day, depending on how you spread out per client. And the billable range that you can charge is between $6,000 and $12,000 per month. And what I see more consistently is between 7 and 10. Now, it's a bigger company that you're doing some work for. Maybe it's a couple more hours. It's on the higher end. So definitely outliers in either way. This is for sales leaders, marketing leaders, customer success folks, HR, recruiting, anything that needs a leadership or a strategy component within those companies. You can transition that to fractional. And this isn't just my experience. You can like Voyager U, which works with exclusively fractionals, and Fractional United with Karina. She's got 6,000 fractionals in there. And they just had a data study that came out that showed wages, or the hourly rate, amongst different levels of skills and what role in the organization. And it was consistent. If it's more of a less strategic role, you're going to be down in the $150 per hour or $100 per hour. One rule of thumb that I think, if people at home want to do the math, is whatever your corporate salary is, chop off the 3 zeros, and that's what your hourly rate. And if you do the math backwards, which I'm not a fan of the public math, so if you're making $150,000 in corporate, think about it as about $150 per hour. You times that by 10 hours, per week per client, and it adds up to being able to replace your income with 2 to 3 clients and only working 2 to 3 days per week. And that's ideal. That's after you get running. If you don't leave corporate, that instantly happens, but it's definitely more, I wouldn't call it an industry standard yet, but it's definitely becoming accepted. And the other data point I'll share is one of the companies that I was a chief revenue officer for, they were less than 3 million in annual revenue, and they were still paying in that range. So even a
Whoa.
smaller company is willing, because they need to invest
Yeah.
in,
Value.
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so if you
Worth it.
do,
Worth
Yeah.
it.
yeah. So
There's
that's why
value
I'm
add.
saying that when people say it's saturated, I'm like, do you know how many companies that are between 2, 5, $10 million that could use your skill set for 12 to 18 months as they figure it out? The other beauty of this is you can start to think about your expertise as a service. I know we're going to level 2 now, but I think that's where I encourage folks that if you're a CRM specialist, maybe they're not going to bring you on as a fractional CRM person, but what do these small businesses need that you do really well, that you could do for $3,000 a month or $5,000 a month, run their entire CRM, do whatever it is. And the other example I'll use from the design side, there's a graphic designer named Brett. His company's Design Joy, and he's been super open about publishing his track record. But last year he did $2 million as a solo company. He does all his own design works. He charges brands, I think, between $5K and $7K per month. I think the rule is you can only do 1 design at a time. You can't send him 6 design requests at once. So you do the math backwards of how many customers he needs, he can manage that. He said it got overwhelming at that level, but I'm like, well, if you don't want to do 2 million, one, bring somebody in, which he didn't want to do, just reduce the number of clients you have. So that's why I said, if the rules don't exist, if you can solve a problem and add value to a customer, there's a
Yeah.
way that you can structure that it's going to make sense for you and for the business.
I mean, and $2 million a year that's kind of livable. That's pretty livable.
Just a little.
Holy shit.
Just a
Yeah.
little.
Yeah, I
Uh,
love that. I love
Brett,
it.
in your recent newsletter, I loved the template that you shared around what problem are you solving for people? What skills are you bringing to solve that problem? We'll link to that to
Yeah,
share with
please.
folks because I think it's super valuable. I'd love to talk about if you're in corporate today. We hear from a lot of folks in high pressure industries. So think law firms, the finance world, banking, all of
Consulting.
that,
Yeah.
who are looking to pivot. For folks who are in these intense industries, they're also highly regulated. So you might not be able to start a side gig because it could be seen as sort of competing priorities with what you're doing. What do you recommend for them to be able to make space to plan for this kind of pivot?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's this highly regulated may be a bigger issue. There's still got to be a way around it. It's still going to come back to what the problem that you solve, who you solve it for. And even if you solve it for free on the side for a few folks, you can test the idea, target maybe a different industry, because that's one thing I've found is unless you're specific in like a healthcare technology or whatever it is that doesn't translate, then maybe a little trickier, and you may just have to get yourself set up, build some runway, and say, all right, I'm going all in. I see the future of this. But short of that, there's no reason why you can't start to have these conversations and do some mini engagements with folks, right? Everything that we're building to go solo, you can build on the side and then just start to have the conversations one off with people. And then you get a sense of, is this really a need to solve problem? Is this a nice to solve problem? Hopefully it's really the need to solve that the business has. So I think there's ways around, and that's the number of the folks I'm actually working with. I'm testing a new offering, 60 days to your first customer. And it originally had the grandiose plans of, end to end of all the things that you should be thinking about. What I found was all these folks are really smart and don't necessarily need all the pieces. But when you get down into what does the specific offering look like, who is the target customer, cut through all the noise, because we all like to chase the shiny objects and go too many. But let's pick one path. What's the problem? What is it you want to solve and work on? And then build the offer into that. Most of the people I'm working with are still in corporate. So it can't be just broadcast to your network that you're open to fractional and contract work. It's not going to work. So we're going to have to be a little more targeted with some of the outreach. But it's absolutely possible. I think that's what we talk ourselves into, that nobody's going to want this, or we have to have a full-on marketing plan. I'm like, at the end of the day, for us to be successful, and I say if you have 10 customers, that you're not going to be able to service 10 customers. So you think about it really, if you're thinking about replacing that income and still working less, 2 to 3 customers is all you need. That's not very many. That's super targeted, and through relationships, referability, John Arms talks about all the time, and then just solving that problem. You got to break the ice with the first one, but then it's much more manageable even than it was 5 years ago when you tried to. You almost did have to have a marketing plan.
It's just starting the conversation with folks and offering advice for free to build those relationships. I've also seen this done where folks start to have the conversation with their employer and they've turned that former employer to a client once they've transitioned into freelance. Have you ever seen that happen with any of your?
I know people have done it. I wouldn't be comfortable going to my most recent employer. But if
Yeah.
you were like me and worked for 3 or 4 or 5 other companies, maybe there's some folks in the past that know you, the work that you do,
Right.
and need some additional help to get that going. You can be super targeted with LinkedIn. And I'll give you just an example. When the Corporate Escapee took off, I didn't want to forget about the work that I was doing with the small business. So this Corporate Escapee work. So everything you see on my social and LinkedIn now is mostly the Escapee stuff, but I did some targeted outreach to some clients saying, hey, I've got this full network of escapees now, Mrs. or Mr. Business Owner. Are you still stuck in your traditional recruiting ways? Are you only looking at a full-time equivalent? Or are you open to ideas around flexible staffing and fractional, those types of things? And I was just sending that out to not direct connections, but second degree connections. I
Yeah.
probably got an 80% connection acceptance rate. Most of them would say, no, that's not my business, because I was targeting too small. Then I went up the next level, 10 to 25 employees. And most people accept the connection or say, no, I'm not in that. But a handful are now saying, yeah, I'm interested in learning more. We're just about to that point. Again, I'm not selling anything on those things, but I've got 3 or 4 leads that I'm working. If I was still employed, they'd have no idea that I'm even talking to these companies. I'm
Right.
not saying be backhand, don't do anything illegal, but
Well, of
they can't
course.
keep you
Yeah.
from trying to grow whatever you want to do on your free time and your own time and what you want to do in the future. So the point is, there's ways you can start to identify customers, even if your LinkedIn says I'm fully employed. You just have to get creative sometimes.
Just building relationships is key.
Yeah,
Just getting
like-minded people.
started.
And that's what I've found with this community. Everybody is super helpful. And maybe it's
They're
just the people I'm
great.
surrounding myself with. But
Yeah.
again, 'cause everybody realizes we're breaking the mold in corporate where it was every person for themselves. It was the political, if eat or be eaten and all that. We're here, everybody's more than willing to help. And again, back to the community, that's really what I want out of this group, is to say, hey, I came across an opportunity that doesn't make sense for me, but I know somebody that was in IT that this would be a good fit for. And we just start referring each other into opportunities. All of our networks are big or big enough
Right.
for us to figure out what we need to have. I've never been more optimistic about a path than if you would ask me this 3 years ago. I'm like, I think that you got to work really hard and figure it out. But now we can eliminate some of those blockers, or the
Yeah.
traditional learning curves.
I love your Slack community. I'll keep plugging it because being a new corporate escapee myself, joining that Slack community, I think it's been an invaluable experience because everyone's just wanting to help each other, learn from one another, help each other grow. And I think that's the beauty in this, is that community piece. And you're sort of indirectly creating your own quote unquote corporate culture through that community
Yeah.
culture of just helpers, people who are interested in helping organizations and helping each other. And it's really nice. Folks don't talk about this often, but it's hard to get your first client. But how was it having to fire your first client?
It's usually mutual. Usually, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Usually you get a sense in the first 3 6 months if it's going to work. And I was working with a client doing some sales, but really what they needed was marketing support, some branding. They had a really good tool, really strong competitive product, but nobody knew them, right? Less than 3% of the industry knew who they were. And I basically said, look, take the money that you're paying me and go invest in a marketing, and more specifically a product marketer that's really going to help, because their entire business was contingent upon if this one product hit the growth targets. You can understand the product from the customer research all the way to how do you position it and move it into the marketplace. Spend your money there, because it's going to be much better than me trying to help you figure out how to cold call our way to that business. And so we agreed to move on just because it didn't provide the right fit. Usually you get a sense if the cultural fit's going to be there. But the way I like to structure my engagements is the first one's we don't call it a get to know you, but as we're having a conversation and we're saying, hey, this is what I think my organization needs. And I'm saying, I think this is what I can deliver. Until you actually get involved into the business and know what you have, it's hard to know. So I always like the 30 or 60 day, let's validate everything that we
Yeah.
thought we knew, and then build the roadmap from there. Even if you're fractional, that's really what you're doing, is helping them build a strategy and go from there. And so I always build an out after that paid assessment period. I hate that term, but I don't know a better way of paid validation, right? There's going to be value. We'll
Yeah.
build the roadmap. And at that point, we'll know if I'm the right fit for what your business needs. And if not, then we can find somebody else to go in there.
Love the concept of a paid assessment time. So everyone gets to test it out and see if you're still in alignment after that 60 days is really nice, actually.
There's a few businesses, like one guy that was working on a corporate development, and really the work that he needed to do, it's a 6 month, right, to do the due diligence. So you can't do that a month, but almost all of them you absolutely could do a trial 1 month, 2 month,
Yeah.
3 month, just to make sure everybody's happy. And again, it takes the risk out of the business owner. It's an easier sell at that point too.
It's
Yeah.
mutually beneficial. Like, yeah,
Where
I
there's
wouldn't.
an out.
things that you want to avoid when you're getting into this space that you don't need?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I see less of the scammy, right? They're there, right? But I think, yeah, we overcomplicate what we're doing,
Yeah.
and you don't need 100 tools. The thing that I found that would have been helpful would have been, how do I reduce the learning curve? Because everything I
Mm.
did was the first time it was on my own. There was nobody to share what was going on. And that's kind of the way I've approached that with TikTok and the newsletter. I'll tell you everything I know, for free. And then if there's still stuff that you want help with, then fine. And that's the way I approached with other folks as well, that said, hey, I really need some help. Like, I've got somebody helping me on the community. Never done a community. I've got an escapee that he does it for me to help eliminate some of those big potholes that I don't need to hit. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is don't let somebody sell you on, there is no secret sauce.
Mm.
If you do this one thing, you'll get 10 customers. No, it just doesn't work like that. I think it's the fundamentals, the basics. It's everything you already know, but people will tell you you have to do more than what you know. And that's just not the case.
I was talking to somebody the other day and they're like, I don't even know how to get started. I'm here. I know I hate my job. I'm in the muck. Have the talking heads like, this is not my beautiful house. This is not my beautiful life on
Yeah.
repeat, right? What are the first like 2 to 3 things you just need to do?
Yeah. If you would have asked me 2 years ago, I wouldn't have necessarily thought of this, but it's,
Yeah.
what do you really want? Right?
Yeah. Best question ever. Best question
It's
ever.
hard
Yeah.
to answer, and mine changes, but I've gotten much more settled into it, because if you can answer that, is your number one goal just to replace or double your income? Because that's going to send you down a path of doing X, Y, or Z. But if it's, hey, if I can just supplement my income or get 50% of it, but I only want to work 1 day or 2 days, I want to be able to do it from the beaches of Florida in the winter and on a lake somewhere in the summer, and really think through, what is it you want from this next phase. And there's no wrong answer, but having that answer makes it easier to figure out what are the next steps that you do to drive that business. Because again, if you want to build the design joy with the 2 million revenue, you're going to have to put a little more work into, I just want to replace my income and work a couple days a week, and I'd be able to do whatever else I want on the other 5 or 4 or 5 days. So in the more macro sense, I think some people probably rolling their eyes and saying it's fluff. And I'm like, trust me, I was that person, but now I always encourage people, go down that path. This is personal, work on it. If you've got a spouse, partner, whatever, be on the same page, because if you're
Yeah.
not on the same page, it's going to make it really difficult, not impossible, but really difficult to go through this. And then from there, I would find that problem, right? I
Mhm.
tell people to go through a skills and experience inventory. And if you've done something for 20 to 30 years, you'll be shocked at how many different things you have to do. But from that, then think about, what is it you like to do? Because you're at it now, a point you get a little bit, you may have to take some jobs or a couple of projects that aren't exactly what you want to do to get started, but start to think about what that is, who you want to work with, what type of business, right? Because some of the folks I talk with, they could go in sales, so they could help small business with sales, but they're also really good at software, so they understand, right? Are you getting at the ROI off your current software? So there's multiple paths. You just get it down on paper and say, all right, and Francesca, back to your point, there's 3 or 4 main problems that you can probably solve, that you've got the expertise, and your LinkedIn profile will show you can walk into these small businesses and say, yeah, I've done this type of
Yeah.
thing. And then you can start to figure out, what does that offering look like? I think too often we go straight from, well, I've got 30 years. I want to be fractional. Make it happen now. Just take the steps to go through it. You maybe make it happen. Again, that was part of my learning curve, was in consulting. You're like, man, why did I do this? This isn't even what I like to do. I like the conversations. I like the problem solving, but I don't like project management. I don't like tracking down stakeholders. I don't like recapping meetings, those types of things. So I think it's figuring out what you want, identifying that problem at the most accurate or clearest point you can from a business owner standpoint, whoever you're solving it for in the business, and then the type of work that you want to do. And then you can start to craft options, again, because those $3,000 to $5,000 a month engagements add up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And And if it's in your core expertise, it's probably not going to take you a lot of time to do it either. I don't like to oversimplify it, but it's not as hard as people make it out to be.
Yeah. Those are such important questions and things to define. And I'm surprised when I talk to people and they're in these situations and I ask them, what do you want? Like, what is it you really, really want? And they don't know. Or sometimes they don't want to admit what they really want because it's very far from where they are today. But these are really important questions to ask yourself for you to get to a space that you are meant to play in and that it'll be easy to play in as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get feedback from folks that said that it took me 2 days, right? Or
Mhm.
longer to go through and actually think through what it was. But when you think about what's next for you, we got a lot of options and flexibility. So now's the time. Like I said, I'm planning on living a while and healthy.
Mhm.
So what am I going to do for the next, 20, 25 years? Jesse Itzler, he's NetJets guy. Sarah Blakely's husband.
Oh.
He's built a really successful business. But one of the things that he had equipped not too long ago, he's like, look, I think he's a year younger than me. He's like, so statistically speaking, I got 23 years left to live, which means I've got 23 summers and I want to do as much in those 23 summers as I absolutely can. I'm like, yes. And it's
Mhm.
so true. And yeah, again, I think we get so conditioned that we can't think like that. Like, that's not for me. That's only for the rich can do this. I'm like, no, that's the whole point of this exercise is you can start to define what does that life look like? And then how do you incorporate your business into it? And I'll give you one quick example. And she was my poster child forever. She and I worked in our last corporate job together. She was training and development, just hard charging corporate. She was moving up the corporate ladder. But then after that, she's like, you know what? I'm done. And she wanted to start a business, training and development. And her whole mission was, I want to take the month of August off so I can go climbing. Didn't matter where in the world. So when she set up her training, she worked with companies and basically said, I'm not working in August. So they knew up front that
Mhm.
she wasn't available for that.
Yeah.
And from that point on, she grew her business. She hired some contractors to do some work. She ultimately lived intentionally in her van, the van life. And then I think she's been in Australia now for 6 months running her company. But the whole point of that is she built her life and then figured out how to work actually fits into it. And I'm like, that's so
The right way to do
refreshing.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's build your life and then figure out how to put the work into it. I think that is the right equation, right? That's the right stack of that story.
It should be. Like I said, better late than never for me figuring that out now. The other thing, folks think they need to build the next Google or Microsoft. Like, if I leave corporate, I've got to start a company. I'm like, not anymore. Solo businesses, seeing the number of solo businesses with 7 figures. I mean, if you start to do the math, and we can do that afterward, you can see it's not that difficult with a couple of freelancers or VAs to help with certain tasks. You can build that. So I'm like, how is it possible that these one-person companies are doing 1 million or 2 million in revenue, but yet there's $3 and $5 million companies that have 22 employees?
There's so much opportunity.
Right.
It's very exciting to think about.
I
Yeah.
love the concept of designing your life and then figuring out how work fits into it. That's how it should be. Because
Yeah.
to your good point, the one thing we can't ever get back is time. Well, hey, we have something we call a rapid round. Fun questions. Yes or no? Are you up for a rapid round?
Fire away.
Okay. Have you ever regretted leaving corporate?
No,
Have you ever had to turn down a dream project because it didn't align with your freelance goals?
not yet.
Did leaving corporate improve your life?
100%.
Is it easier to say no to projects now that you're your own boss?
Yes-ish.
Okay.
Instinct still wants to take jobs, but my getting better at saying no if it doesn't align. And usually I figure that a little bit earlier in the process than I would have before. But yeah, it's still tempting, right? If they're willing to pay a certain amount of money, it's, do I want to do this? So
Yeah. That's a car. That's a
Understandable.
car.
Yeah.
exactly.
Do you attend more or fewer meetings now than when you were in corporate?
Fewer, much
Good
fewer.
answer. Good
Good
answer.
answer.
Yeah.
Do you think contracting has made you a better negotiator overall?
That's a good question. I would say yes. You go through more negotiations with potential customers, you get much more comfortable. The first couple are like, oh my God, I can't. You're prepared for 3 days, right? And if whatever they say, you're going to say yes to because you don't want to jeopardize the deal. But then as you start to go through a few, you realize it's more of a value based exchange than it is them walking away because you wanted a few extra dollars.
It's good to hear you got nervous on your first negotiations too.
Oh,
That's
for
a big
sure.
common
And
thing.
still do the bigger deals that you do get nervous because again, especially if
Yeah.
it's a project I want, then it
Mhm.
tends to get more nervous. The more you really want something, the more you tend to get nervous for.
Have you ever worked from an unconventional location?
That's a good question. I can't think of what unconventional would mean anymore. 'Cause I was actually working at home for a few years prior to the pandemic. So I've kind of worked where I've been. So I wish I had a more exotic answer for you
No,
in
like
this
no,
one.
like a treehouse in Costa
Yeah.
Rica or something.
Not a
Yeah,
closet.
okay.
No, it's not.
No, I've been on a Zoom call with some guy that was cruising down the highway at 65 miles an hour from Detroit to
It's
Chicago
unsafe.
on a Zoom video. I'm like, dude, it's okay. You can put it on sound. I don't need to be seeing you scooting down the highway like
Please don't
this.
get into
But
an accident.
uh,
Do you have your midday naps taken an uptick?
no naps. I haven't figured out the naps, but definitely
Okay.
more if I want to shut it down.
Nice, nice.
Can I give you just one tip
Of
that
course you
I
can.
learned from
Yeah.
this? That because when I started it, everything was I'm like, it's a contract. I can schedule my day however I want. But what I found was it was chaotic. And again, back to that book, Time Rich, it said, hey, if you calendarize and block time, it changed my life. It really did. So if people are struggling with that, I'm not saying you have to calendar or block, find a system that works for you because you'll be surprised at how much more time you actually do have.
Time blocking. I also am a fan of the time block, and I love that you're building in walks because that's good. Get some
Yeah.
sunshine, get some vitamin D. Last question, more of like a superstitious thing. Do you have a favorite coffee mug or something that you're superstitious about for your work days?
Wouldn't say superstitious, but that's funny. I don't know if you can see.
Oh, the puppy.
Yeah, it was unfortunately she was 18. We lost her last year, but she was my office mate
I'm sorry.
for like 5 years. And so my oldest daughter got me this cup as a gift. So I keep that as it's a good luck cup. So not superstitious, but more of a comfort feeling.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah. Right before we adjourned, if you were talking to your kid or a best friend who is contemplating this, what would you tell them?
Yeah, don't wait, right? If there's a way to take control, the big macro one is don't run your life around your job. You may have to in the short term, but figure out a plan to get away from that as soon as possible. Get the skills you need, pay your dues, but always keep in mind that there's another way. You just want to be in control. Easier said than done sometimes, but it comes back to that time factor. And maybe now I'm just more sensitive to it as I'm older. But the earlier you can get that it's okay to find alternative paths. My daughters know by now that corporate I'm not a big fan of anymore. It served me well. It had its purpose, but I think there's better ways to do that. And just, again, take control of your own, figure out a way to build your life and then incorporate work into it. And the last thing I'll add to that is figure out what you want. You may not know it at 25 to 29, you may not know, but I'd still have a plan. Even if this plan changes, think about where you go. Because if you're not driving towards something, then you're just along for the ride.
And there's a lot of good work to do, right? In a huge space, like wide open spaces.
And people that appreciate that, these business owners and small businesses appreciate it. They're open to it. There's enough that appreciate what you can do, appreciate your point of view, appreciate your thoughts on something. And I've heard from a number of folks that said that's one of the most refreshing things is somebody's actually listening to me. They're
Yeah.
out there and they're hungry for your expertise.
Time
Yeah.
to tap into your main character energy.
Oh, I like that.
It's
Yeah.
you're the main character of your story, so build the story you want.
Brett, thanks so much for joining us today. We'll post in the show notes your Slack channel, your podcast, TikTok, and your LinkedIn, just so everyone can go out and be part of your Corporate Escapee community. Thank you for joining us today.
No, it
Yes.
was absolutely my pleasure.
We'll be back next week with new week, new headlines. Thanks so much for joining us today. Like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. You can come over and say hi to us on the TikToks and LinkedIn community. Hit us up at yourworkfriends.com. We're always posting stuff on there. And if you found this episode helpful, share with your work friends.
Bye,
Thanks, friend.
friend.